Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for September through December. At the end of August, we were still seeing initial attack fires across the Great Basin, and we had several team fires still ongoing across Utah, northern Nevada, up into Idaho and Wyoming. However, significant moisture during the last week of August decreased our fire behavior on all of these large fires and also reduced the number of initial attack fires we were seeing. And you can see the precipitation here showing quite a bit of precipitation, especially over the northern half of the Great Basin, which was well above normal for the last 2 weeks of the month. We did have some precipitation down south in parts of southeast Nevada into southwest and even eastern Utah, which were above normal in some areas, but definitely some drier spots over southeast Utah. Even parts of central Utah up into the Uinta Basin didn't see quite as much precipitation, even into parts of southwest Wyoming. Looking at the last 30 days throughout the month of August, we saw above normal temperatures really across Idaho, Wyoming, down into the eastern half of the Great Basin and into far western areas. And then precipitation, largely skewed by the precipitation we saw later in the month, was well above normal over western and northern areas. The only areas that saw below normal precipitation for the month of August were the far southern portions of Nevada, the Arizona Strip, and southern and eastern Utah. Looking at our precipitation for the water year dating back to October 1st of 2024, you can see even with the recent precipitation, still well below normal precipitation across much of Nevada and Utah into southern Idaho for the water year, and only parts of western Idaho into northwest Nevada saw near normal precipitation, and a few small spots in Wyoming. So we still have significant drought conditions across the region, maybe not as significant as we had a couple of months ago, but we still are seeing a large area of extreme to exceptional drought over parts of southern, eastern Nevada, and then over into Utah and even into western Wyoming, with mainly severe to extreme drought. These small exceptional drought areas are further east into Colorado. Up into central Idaho, we are seeing drought along with much of Idaho, with the exception of southwest Idaho, down into northern and parts of northwest and western Nevada, which are just abnormally dry. Looking at the last week since or ending August 24th, rather, you can see we weren't seeing any signs of flash drought, and this was really on the early onset of the precipitation moving up from the south. And obviously, since then, conditions have significantly moderated. So looking at some of our fuel conditions, we still have quite a bit of fine fuel loading to deal with going into the fall months over western and northern Nevada, up into southern Idaho. The image here on the left is just showing the standing dead from 2024 carryover. So we had the carryover over northern Nevada into southwest Idaho, and then the new growth as well. So we will be looking at that as we go to the fall months and we see windy conditions with cold fronts, especially after prolonged dry periods. Looking at the rangeland fire probability, still highlighting those areas over northern Nevada into Idaho and even northern Utah, which is really where we've seen our large fires, and down into the central Utah mountains, obviously, but we're looking at just fine fuel conditions. So that probability of large fire is still there going into the fall months with all of that standing dead fine fuel loading on the ground. So looking at some of our current fuel conditions as of August 29th, our 10-hour fuel moisture is certainly elevated, especially over the eastern half to two-thirds of the region. Not quite as low, or not quite as high, rather, over western and northwest Nevada, but still in that 9 to 10% range. 100-hour fuel moisture, we're seeing the similar trend with really seeing the highest fuel moistures over parts of the north and eastern half of the region. And then 1,000-hour fuel moistures didn't respond quite as significantly as some of our smaller fuels. We did see the response in the 1,000-hour fuel moistures coming up with the moisture we saw late in August, but it didn't come up as rapidly or as much as we saw in the hundreds in 10 hours. So how conditions changed from mid-August until the end of the month with our ERCs, you can see here on the left in mid-August, we saw a large area that was above the 90th to 97th percentile with ERCs, and ERCs even climbed higher than that, going a little bit further into August across Nevada, Utah, into southern Idaho. However, by the end of the month with the moisture, we saw all ERCs drop below the 50th percentile. But as we head into September, they are slowly on the rise again with the warmer and drier conditions, but we are expecting some periods of moisture at times going into the first half of September. So we will see those ERCs climb for a bit, but then they should drop back down. Fuel moistures were very low going through July and August, really across much of the Great Basin with our live sagebrush fuel moistures. And you can see that here just with an example from the Winnemucca district at New Jungo. The orange line is the 2025 line, and the red is the historical low for the time of year. And you can see really all the way from May or June through July and into August, the 2025 fuel moisture was tracking right at record lows or setting new records. So we had a prolonged period where live fuel moisture was well below normal and near or at record lows for the time of year for much of the Great Basin, which really aided in our large fire concerns going through the months of July and August. So a quick look at how our dead fuel moisture has changed at the end of the month. This is 100-hour fuel moisture. So the top right image here is for the Payette. The bottom is for Western Wyoming. And you can see the blue line is for 2025. We saw a significant rise in our 100-hour fuel moistures from those very low conditions we were seeing throughout July and August, just with the recent moisture. They are on the downward trend, and you can see from the green forecast line that they are continued to project to drop further to near or below average, but definitely not near the very low conditions we were seeing earlier in the summer. Similar trend looking at Western Nevada and also the Fish Lake here on the bottom right, where 100-hour fuel moisture really took a stark drive upwards with the recent moisture and again is tracking down, but should level off as we see a little bit more moisture at times move into these regions going into September. So again, even though we are seeing those fuel moistures drop, we are not expecting them to get to the very low levels that we saw through much of July and into August. So now we'll look at the forecast conditions and what to expect from here on out. For the 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, you can see for the Great Basin, generally still warm or above normal temperatures with generally above normal precipitation, especially into the north. This is somewhat of a difference when you look at the September outlook for the full month, showing generally equal chances of above normal temperatures and precipitation. So right now it's looking like the 8 to 14 day outlook might be a little bit more showing to what we will see throughout September, with still periods of precipitation expected to impact the region. As we go through October through December, the 3-month outlook from the Climate Prediction Center shows still warmer temperatures and generally drier conditions over southern areas with any above normal precipitation across the Pacific Northwest and across the northern tier. We are expecting either weak La Nina conditions to develop or at least a slightly cool bias and still remain in neutral conditions with the ENSO. So this would be a little bit more of a trajectory that would be more likely with a La Nina situation where we see wetter conditions developing up north throughout the late fall and winter months and drier conditions down south. So we'll see how that plays out as we go later in the winter. So putting everything together, we still are carrying above normal fire potential for parts of western and northwest Nevada, across northern Nevada and southwest Idaho, mainly in the lower elevations where we have that significant fine fuel loading, which will remain dry going into the fall months as we start to see some cold fronts potentially move across the region. However, with the moisture that we still could see going through the first half of September, that will largely play a role in the fuel conditions in these areas. So we'll continue to watch that, but right now the threat is still there, even after recent moisture, with some of our lower elevations to still be somewhat problematic potentially later in September. Otherwise, by October through December, we are expecting conditions to return to normal across the Great Basin. The only concerns will be late in the fall into the early part of the winter in these areas of above normal fine fuel loading. We could see some localized increased fire potential after prolonged dry periods if we do have strong cold fronts, bringing strong winds that move through the region if we do see ignitions. So that will be something to watch, and again, a little bit more of a localized concern and definitely event-driven and certainly more brief in duration of increased fire potential, but something when we do have high grass load, something to pay attention to later into the year. That concludes our seasonal webcast for the month. Check back next month for the latest updates.